Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofermento, and I am so excited about today's episode and interview because if you've always sat there and anytime you walk into a franchise, you think, gosh, I could run one of these things. This seems like a much faster way to get a business and have it be successful and have operations already in place and marketing support. Well, if you've ever thought about franchising, that is precisely why we've brought today's guest on. And on top of his expertise when it comes to franchising opportunities, I just love this guy's story, even the way that he describes himself. So let me tell you all about today's guest. His name is Conor Godfrey. Conor calls himself a recovering Wall Street investment banker. I love that. He spent nearly 20 years in maximum grind mode as a trader before deciding to switch paths and follow his dream of owning his own business. Today, as one of the top consultants in the US, he helps professionals create additional income streams and build wealth. That is an important thing that we're going to talk about today. Not just income, not just revenue, but building wealth through franchise ownership. His company is called Trinity Advisory. They specialize in franchise consulting. They help professionals, executives, and aspiring entrepreneurs. So yes, all of you entrepreneurs out there, he's going to help you identify and investigate top-tier franchise business opportunities. Their goal is to reshape the way you think about your career and financial future, empowering you with the knowledge and insights you need to make informed business investment decisions. This is going to be a fun one. I'm personally very curious about this, so I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive straight into my interview with Conor Godfrey. All right, Conor, I am so very excited that you're here with us today. First things first, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Good to meet you.
Heck yes, likewise. Well, I love your backstory. I love the work that you do. You support the very premise of this entire show, which is helping people go from entrepreneur to entrepreneur. So, Conor, before we get to that stuff, take us beyond the bio. Who's Conor? How'd you start doing all these cool things?
Yeah, thanks. So, it's interesting that you bring that up because that was my first thought. I forget if it was my wife or myself that initially discovered your podcast. And when I heard the name, I was like, that kind of sounds perfect. So I should probably be talking to Brian. So I appreciate you having me on. Grew up in New York City, spent the first couple of decades of my career on Wall Street, was fortunate enough to have a dad who owned his own business. I have a brother who owns his own business and, came from a family where, Wall Street was great. It was an interesting learning experience. I kind of always felt like it was going to be a stepping stone for me to do my own thing. I always wanted to, and no matter how successful I was on Wall Street, kind of always had my dad poking me saying, "Yeah, that's great, but when are you going to do your own thing? All right, you should be doing your own thing. You should be working for yourself." And interestingly, as I got further along in life and in career, that really started to take hold with me. I kind of felt a real personal pull to get out of the corporate world and to do something for myself and not be beholden to anybody else, essentially, and really just remain accountable to myself. I had 3 little kids. That was when the wheels kind of started to turn, right? There was a relative level of expectation on Wall Street that, when you went to bed on Sunday, you probably weren't going to see your kids again until you woke up the following Saturday. And that just didn't really suit me, right? I wanted to be more present for them. I wanted to be a present father. And I really wanted to drive my own outcomes. And, it was a wonderful learning experience. I'm certainly glad that I had that experience. And I'm even more happy that I was able to take this leap. And so part of my kind of origin story as far as getting into business was the thought that, I can help other people do this, right? I mean, I don't know if you've ever worked in corporate, Brian, but the number of times that I heard, people say some iteration of, I wish I could do X or Y or Z, but I've been doing this for so many years that, I just don't think there's anything else that I could do. And I'll often say to people now, as long as you tell yourself that, that's the truth, but it actually is not the truth, right? I mean, I think people underestimate their ability to do something else because they get stuck in the corporate grind for so long and they get stuck in that routine. And, I used to play what I would call deathbed exercise with people, which I know sounds really morbid and not a wonderful exercise to go through. But the thought is that, you hear oftentimes these anecdotes about, people on their deathbed and what they wish they spent more time doing or any regrets that they have in life. And the common anecdote is that, no one ever kind of wished that they worked more, right? It was always spending time with loved ones or, doing something that they were more passionate about as far as how they earned a living. And so I kind of made it my mission to help people achieve those goals, right? And so now I help people identify opportunities that could be a great fit for them. And then I give them a really strong process, and I guide them through and coach them through that process so that they can vet, top tier franchise opportunities with, the end goal of just putting them in position to make an informed business investment decision at the end of the day, right? And that oftentimes doesn't mean that they're saying yes. It just means that they are acquiring the tools and the data and the information that they need in working together to make the right decision for them and their loved ones. And that's been a really great experience and really rewarding.
Yeah, I love that overview, Conor. And it's so cool to hear the way that you think, even in that overview, because I feel like we're really capturing Conor, the Wall Street investment banker. And you have that mindset. It's ingrained in you because, of course, you did that and you were super successful at that. And so that's why I love the words that you choose with that hat on when you talk about wealth and looking at people's financial pictures. But then we also have Conor, the entrepreneur hat on. And I love the way that you think about growth and the way you think about opportunities. But then what I really appreciate about the way that you operate, Conor, is also Conor the dad, Conor the family man is there, and that this is also part of a lifestyle decision to you. It's not just a career. And so I really appreciate the culmination of all three of those things. And I think that I'm probably setting you up for this next answer because I want to go, why franchising? Why is franchising the perfect marriage of all these different experiences that you've personally had and the goals of so many others who you're absolutely spot on. I think everybody in society is just like, I wish I could be my own boss. I don't want to have to ask for vacation time anymore.
Nice, right? I mean, it's funny how many times I've probably said in my tenure doing this, like, do you really want to continue asking another adult for a day off, right? And that kind of, maybe pokes people in a certain pain point and gets them refocused on the why part of why we're interacting and why they're looking at businesses. Why franchising? So, I actually kind of think that franchising is sort of the tool, right? The ultimate goal is what you said, which is freedom of time, quality of life, right? Those are the outcomes that you're really striving for. There are a number of ways to do it, right? It's not just franchising. Franchising happens to be the way that I chose and the way that I guide people. For me, and I think for a lot of other people in corporate, it bridges a really important gap, right? I mean, we all have responsibilities. I'll speak for myself personally. As I mentioned, three young children. I live in the suburbs of New York City, which is not an inexpensive place to live. I had relatively high income replacement needs when I exited Wall Street. And so, I love that wantrepreneur terminology that you use because, I always thought of it like, I don't have this brilliant idea, right? I don't have this brilliant business idea that I'm confident I can go execute on to the extent that I can support my family, maybe over a long enough time horizon, but certainly not in the short term where I can be comfortable enough that I know I can support my family appropriately, right? And so franchising was always this really interesting bridge to me, which was, hey, if someone gives me this business in the box and I have the support and the infrastructure and the built-in marketing and the brand awareness, and I can go execute on that, right? So you'll hear the cliche sort of used fairly often in my world, which is you get to work for yourself, but not by yourself. And that was really valuable to me. That's not to say that it's not without risks, and it wasn't incredibly challenging in a lot of ways. I also was fortunate enough that I have a wife who, to be honest with you, is really the entrepreneur out of the two of us, who had built two businesses from the ground up. And I saw what a Herculean effort that was. And so again, franchising fit this really interesting niche to me that allowed me to take this leap where I was still confident enough that I can build this fast enough that I can still keep food on the table, keep my family in my home, right? Be able to pay the mortgage, be able to take on all these other responsibilities that I had as a father. And that really, I thought, would resonate with other people, right? And so that was sort of the genesis of my business. Well, hey, if I can do this, maybe I can teach other people how to do it as well. And if I can help them be strategic in how they think about what businesses they should be going and looking at, thinking about businesses characteristically, right? Meaning, what's your role as the owner? What does the day-to-day look like? How does that fit into how you're looking to live, work, and play, if you'll pardon the cliche? Then I can go out and help you find sort of custom pick businesses, right? So as with everything else, I think in our world, everyone's first stop is the internet, right? So when people have that thought that you clearly articulated earlier, which I think a lot of people do, you walk into, a McDonald's or a Subway or whatever, and your thought is, man, maybe I could run a business like this. Maybe that would allow me to work for myself. And so you go online, right? And you search for franchises and it spits out this list of 4,000 different franchises. And with a lot in our world, it creates more white noise than really you're equipped to handle, right? And so ultimately, what do? You throw in the towel and go, it was kind of a passing thought, but I don't even know enough to know where to start. That's where I step in, right? So I'm going to take you through a very strategy-focused process where we're going to figure out what it is that you want, what are the goals you're looking to achieve, and what sets you up potentially the best to accomplish those goals. I'm going to go out into the universe of franchising and figure out what's available and could suit those goals and get you introduced to those concepts, right? And then I'm going to coach you through how we vet them, why they might work for you, and show you exactly how to get all of the information that you need to make that informed decision that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, Conor, you just put something into perspective for me that I don't think I recognize this pattern, but it's so simple now that you've called it out. I obviously talk to entrepreneurs for a living every single day of my life, and it really didn't hit me until now how often I hear that stumbling block of, well, I don't have a business idea. And you heard me tease it at the top of today's episode. Part of the franchising appeal is you get operations, you get marketing, you get proof of concept, you get all of these things. But I didn't even think about the fact that you no longer need your own business idea. You get to take somebody else's idea that's already proven and tested. And so it really bypasses that huge barrier that a lot of people have in their own minds. With that said, I would imagine that it's probably the paradox of choice where, you and I could rattle off 500 different franchise ideas. We could start a local electrician franchise. People don't think about service-based franchises because we always see the Subways and the McDonald's of the world. How do we even start to navigate? Yeah, we don't need to have our own idea, but we do need to have an idea of what type of franchise we want to be involved with. How do you start that conversation?
You know what? Not necessarily. I don't think you really do need to know essentially where to start. It's funny because oftentimes when I'm taking people through that strategy building session and their answers to a lot of my questions are, I don't know. And they almost say that in an apologetic way. I'm really sorry, I don't know. And I said, don't be sorry. If you knew all the answers to these questions, you wouldn't need me, right? And it can illustrate a couple of things. It can illustrate open-mindedness to a whole bunch of different stuff, right? So when you think about where to start, I'll ask you the questions that help you figure out those answers. And I always say to people, there are no wrong answers, which is nice. Like, it's your process. I'll give it to you, but it's ultimately yours and there are no wrong answers, right? So the onus is upon me to ask the right questions to figure out what direction you want to go. You're absolutely right. And I'm actually glad that you brought it up. I mean, I laugh with people when I speak to them because, probably 98% of everybody that I speak to, their first thought when they hear franchising is one of four brands, right? It's McDonald's, Dunkin' Donuts, Chick-fil-A, and Subway, right? Maybe you add a couple others that people are really familiar with, but it's essentially quick serve restaurants. There are somewhere in the range of 4,000 different franchise concepts in the US right now, right? So they really span the entirety of the economy. You brought up service-based stuff, right? There's tons of really interesting service-based franchise businesses. They allow you to, potentially lower the initial investment side because you don't always have a large brick and mortar to go with it. So these are all kind of questions that we would work through in that strategy, session. So it kind of all begins with, why are we talking? Why are you thinking about doing this now? Because I think it can't just be about money, right? Anybody who's thinking about going into business purely for money almost never does, because ultimately they get to a place where they realize that making money in a lot of ways is just easier in the corporate job, not building wealth, but the paycheck part, right? And then it's, okay, what are you looking to achieve, right? Let's kind of put some context around financial goals. What does this look like long term? How does exit strategy play into that? Then you're kind of getting into the wealth building side of it, right? And then from there, you want to talk about businesses characteristically. So, really basic, straightforward stuff. Where do you want the business to be geographically? What kind of business structure are you looking for, right? There are different structures of businesses in franchising. Some are kind of owner-operator where you're in it and involved full-time. Some are more of an executive ownership model, meaning stuff that allows you to kind of build a business on the side potentially if you're thinking about creating a corporate exit strategy over a certain course of time. And really, they're set up to allow you to keep your day job. They're not easy, right? I mean, I think a lot of people that claim to do what I do will say, yeah, you can do it fully absentee, right? And you plop down this much money and it spits out that much money. And if it were that easy, everybody would do it. That's just not the truth. But there is enough support and infrastructure in a lot of these businesses that allows you to keep your day job and build this business on the side, provided you have enough capacity to take those two things on, right? It's can be a heavy lift, but if done appropriately, it can really lead to some incredible outcomes. And then really all the way down to on an industry level, right? What do you have a particularly strong aversion to? Anything you don't want to look at necessarily? And then the other side of that coin, what is it maybe that would spark some interest? You know, do you like the home services space? Do you like fitness? And we kind of just paint a picture through this strategy process to really allow them to understand what it is they want. I'm just asking the questions. And at the end of the day, I'll come back to them with maybe 3 or 4 or 5 brands and say, hey, if I'm any good at what I do, these should be a really good fit for you. Let's go start to learn about them, get you connected to these businesses. So the first and foremost, they're responsive, right? That's another issue that people run into. Going back to that being online example, right? And the white noise, you know, people reach out because they want to have a Chick-fil-A, right? Just for argument's sake, everybody loves Chick-fil-A these days. They never even get a response, right? So I'm going to assure you that you're going to get a response, that you're going to connect to the heads of development, and you're going to start learning about this business from the inside. And then we're also going to connect you to existing franchise owners within that system so that you can kind of use their experience, right, to vet what you've learned from the franchise. And that's where you really start to connect the dots and understand what a day in the life of looks like, how that pairs with what you've learned from the corporate, and understand the entirety of the structure of this business to see if it might be a good fit for you.
Yeah, Conor, gosh, I love that overview. This is just a huge testament to how and why you're good at what you do. And that is because it's a process with you. I love the fact that you navigated us through that with even here on the air on a public podcast with such transparency and honesty, because I appreciate the reality check in our line of work, Conor. Too many people want to throw around that term of passive income, but you just directly called it out. Nothing's going to be truly passive. Otherwise, every single one of us would already be doing it. So yeah, I love that open recognition. I do want to go here with you because not only, like I said, I'm going to pick on that Wall Street investment banker hat because you brought up money. So we're going to talk about money today because a lot of people probably feel like this is completely unattainable. Why? Because I think you called it out. A really important point is that we think of franchises as those huge franchises, those 4 that you listed. The native Bostonian in me loves that Dunkin' Donuts made the cut in your top 4 franchise list. With that in mind, though, we feel like it's got to be big business. It's got to be super expensive and out of reach for most people. What do those investments look like? And of course, it's a wide gamut, and I know that it completely varies, but give us an idea of what types of fees, not just dollar amounts, but what is upfront? What are the considerations longer term? I'd love to hear that side of the story.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you asking because I do think that's a common misconception, right? That you need kind of millions of dollars to think about it, or that they're all $1 million investments, right? And that's just not the truth. There are franchise systems out there that are as inexpensive as $50,000 or $60,000 all in to get into, and then there's stuff that is up into the multi-million-dollar range as well, right? And really everything in between. And that's an important part of the strategy. Obviously, where is your comfort from an investment standpoint? Now, look, people need to be qualified to think about it, right? I set my particular bar as probably higher than others because I think just because you feasibly can put somebody into business, financially speaking, doesn't mean that you should, right? And the goal here is to help people better their lives and build wealth through business, not, put them in a position where everything needs to go perfectly for them to succeed or they're going to, be hurt financially. Because as you know, as well as I do, almost never does everything go perfectly in business. So, there needs to be a little bit of padding there. And it depends on the type of business structure as well, right? So if you're looking at owner-operator opportunities, they tend to be typically a little bit less expensive, right? And especially if you're looking at service-based stuff. There are some home-based franchises, right, where maybe it's kind of more consultative in nature and you can run it right out of your home office. And essentially, the entire cost is just the franchise fee, right? And then there are other things that come with a very large brick and mortar, right? If you're building a McDonald's, just for lack of a better example, that's going to be a multi-six-figure investment, obviously. And then there's stuff, there are pool companies out there that can get into the multi-million dollars, or big spas, things along those lines. The way that I think about it, in monetary terms, is it always comes down to an allocation of capital, right? Like, where can you best allocate your capital for the best return? As you said, the only truly way, in my estimation, to kind of make money passively is through traditional market investments, right? You invest your money into the market. It gives you a historical return of X. If you're thinking about the S&P 500, call it 10%, right? Just on a historical basis. Obviously, some years it's up 20, some years it's down 20. So for me, if a business isn't at least giving you the potential to return that much, plus however you value your sweat equity above and beyond that, right? Because you get 10% by just putting your money into the market. In a business, even in the most semi-passive businesses, there's going to be some sweat equity that goes into that. And you have to value that, you being the candidate, right? And because only I think the person can determine how they value that actual sweat equity and how much effort is going into it. And we kind of, that all becomes part and parcel of the process that we would take them through in an effort to help them understand what the ROI is on these investments, if done properly, right? I mean, the biggest part that people need to keep in mind, and I think where people get stuck a lot when they're thinking about investing into the space, is they want certainty from an ROI perspective. You know, what is this going to earn and how much is it going to net me? And I said, well, you're forgetting about the most important part of that calculus, which is you as the owner, right? So, you know, there are historical returns that you can look at, and you'll discover that when you connect to these companies, and they'll take you through that. But ultimately, the onus is on you to drive this business, right? So part of the process is understanding what drives top performance within these systems, right? Speaking to those people that are top performers, trying to get an understanding of what it is, what their keys are to success, so that you can ask yourself and have an honest assessment of yourself, you know, can I replicate that, right? Is that something that I'm well equipped to do? And balancing that with the other side, right? You can't forget about where the challenges are, right? So I talk a lot about understanding, you know, the most well-rounded picture of any system as you can. You do that by talking to the franchisees, right? And on one side, you're talking to top performers. You also want to understand where the challenges and headwinds are, right? Because if it's too much of a rose-colored glasses, you know, kind of scenario or exercise that you're going through, you're probably missing something, because business just isn't that easy. And when you can discover where the challenges and headwinds are and go through that same exercise, i.e., okay, now I understand what drives top performance. I think I'm well equipped to replicate that. And I can also understand where the challenges and headwinds are. And I think I'm well equipped to overcome that. Connecting those two dots is a really powerful part of getting people to kind of bet on themselves and take that leap into business ownership.
Yeah, Conor, I really appreciate that point that you made in there about the fact that we're not just buying an ATM, we're buying a business that we are actively part of that solution. We are actively driving that growth. And I think that, to your point, it sounds like you and I both really enjoy calling out the fact that everyone thinks there's a magic pill. There is no magic pill. Anything we choose to do is going to require work, and franchising is no different. Of course, it comes with many of the great benefits that we're talking about here today, but ultimately, it's a business that we're investing into, and we are the driver. We are the executives behind that. So I really appreciate those real life insights. I want to ask you, because hearing the way you talk about it, you know, we could talk about ROI, and where my head goes as a lifelong marketer is I'm just like, we always look at what's the payback period? When is that money that we're investing? When's it going to come back to us? But what I find fascinating about the work that you do with Trinity Advisory is that you talk so much about wealth, that this isn't merely just a what percent gains can I get this year? You're actually talking about wealth building. And I'm sure you've seen so many countless examples in your client portfolio of this, is that people really build something that continues to work year after year. This isn't, I'm going to invest in the stock market today and maybe I'll get some dividends along the way, but otherwise I'm just going to get these annual returns. It's a wealth builder. Talk to us about that aspect of it, because this is the gift that keeps on giving with that work that we do put into it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. And again, you know, not to ever paint a picture, I like so much that we're sort of on the same page and aligned from the standpoint of being very open and honest with people about where the challenges are, and that it's always going to be difficult, right? And if you're willing to take on that challenge and do it right and find the right model, it can lead to extraordinary things. But, you know, don't ever kind of conflate that with this is going to be easy, right? And so I do a lot. I think that's not only really important from the standpoint of being fair to the people and honest with the people that I'm working with, but I think it also kind of brings out the truly entrepreneurial, right? I hate to say it sort of weeds out certain people, but it does. The people that go into it thinking that, hey, well, this is going to be easy, he'll find me the right thing, and it's just going to spit out an ROI, that will become very clear to them very quickly that it's not for them. And in an interesting way, that can actually be quite powerful for people who have thought about doing something in business. And once you scratch that itch, you actually feel better about your day job, even though you thought you hated it, right? So that's kind of an interesting benefit to it. But yeah, I like to say that sort of the leverage is in the scale. And what I mean by that is, in this space, when you're really thinking about wealth building, and one of the things I'll talk to people about early and often is, what does this look like as an ideal outcome or in a perfect world down the road? Like, tell me what that looks like. Are you creating a legacy play for your children? Are you looking for an exit strategy, with a large multiple where you can have a liquidity event that really is life-changing? And the answers vary, and I always find them really interesting. But it's amazing to see when people really start to dig into it and understand not only how you can finance these things, right? So that you're using someone else's cash sometimes to fund your business, and can start to think about cash on cash returns as opposed to, going hundreds of thousands of dollars out of pocket into something, which, diminishes the returns a lot because you're not, leveraging debt in an appropriate way. But yeah, it's been really fascinating to see, people kind of develop one unit at a time over the course of maybe 5 or 6 or 7 years, and they're all kicking out healthy multiples. And then at the end of the day, there's actually a lot of private equity money kind of in this space now as well. I had a friend who I won't name in this venue, but who opened a boutique fitness concept, opened multiples of them, got approached by private equity, actually said no to them a few times, and had built a really successful 5-unit enterprise. Each one of them was kicking out a very healthy margin. And I think he probably sold that business for maybe 5 or 6 times EBITDA. So we're talking multiple, millions of dollar exit, which is kind of, that's sort of the goal. That's the gold standard. And again, I don't want to sort of indicate that that's, happens 90% of the time. It doesn't. He was kind of, a minority case, I would say, because it was an extraordinary outcome for him. But that really is what it's about, and that's how I want people to think about it out of the gates, right? If you're thinking about it, not that there's anything wrong with just doing one and replacing income because it allows you to work for yourself. That's all fine and good as well, and that can bring tremendous joy and quality of life to people, and that's the even more important part. But for people who are thinking about building wealth, first and foremost, I would say it's about finding the right match, right? It's about finding that business that allows you to leverage those skill sets and kind of pairs that with work that you want to do, right? That's a really important part as well, because if it's going to be hard, you got to want to do it. And then think about how you kind of continue to leverage, through certain financing vehicles to build a larger enterprise, so that down the road, you've got a really solid cash flowing business that would be attractive to any number of different people.
Yeah, so well said, Conor. I didn't tell you this off the air before we started hitting record, but I'm just going to say it while we're on the air together. Part of what really made you stand out to us in this space is that you're not only bringing this real stuff to us here in such a transparent, honest way, which we're so deeply appreciative of, but what really stood out to us when we came across your work, and even on your LinkedIn, anyone who goes to your LinkedIn, which listeners, you already know, we're going to drop that link down below in the show notes, but Conor, it just seems to us like you also invest in a very healthy mindset that sets all this stuff up for success. Listeners can't see you and I right now. Most of them are just listening to this while they're on the go, but it's not lost on me that what I can see behind you on the wall is memento mori, which is something that I think about so much. It's of course from a lot of stoicism thought, and it's deeply rooted in growth thought, and it's really important for us to remember these important life lessons. So I want to put you on the spot, and I guess it's a twofold question. Is I want to get inside the mind of Conor, the fellow business owner and the fellow entrepreneur, because you also are one of us, not just the subject matter expertise. So what are those inner thoughts and in mindset that has helped you flourish? And then extrapolating on that, just because you have so many successful case studies, what are those mindset traits and the attitudes that you see that separates successful franchise owners and business owners in general from those who don't make it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've heard it a lot, and I've really thought about this question a lot, because people often ask me that, which I think is a great question. When I first connect with someone and they're thinking about business ownership, and they say to me, what is it? What's the common trait? What's the type of person you look for? What's their business background? And I will tell you pretty confidently that none of that matters, right? The trait that matters is grit, hands down. I'll say to people, if you find the right business and if you properly vet that business, right, there's always going to be an element of fear that's involved in doing it, because there's risk, right? So that's totally natural. But what you need to really think about, I love that you brought up the memento mori. I have that all over my website. I think about it on an almost daily basis. But if you can find the right business, what I'll say to people is, if you refuse to quit, that can only yield one outcome, right? That's the kind of mindset that I think you need to get to when you're getting into business. Because if you promise yourself you won't quit, ultimately that leads to success. Everybody's time horizon will differ. That doesn't mean it's going to be easy. It's the old, kind of fall down 7 times, get up 8. The memento mori thing, I'm so happy that you brought up. And maybe I'll just kind of tell you my own journey. When I left Wall Street, I was fortunate enough that my wife, completely supported it, had my back. But it was incredibly challenging, right? I would say, and I'm kind of an open book when it comes to this stuff. My first 6 months in business, I think I, made about $30,000, right? Needless to say, where I lived with 3 kids, everything else, that wasn't going to cut it. And there were literally times in that first year of business that I was like curled up in the fetal position, just thinking I was going to lose everything, right? I'm going to lose my wife. I'm going to lose my house. I'm going to lose my family. And thankfully, my wife would come over and just kind of kick me and say, well, look, nothing's going to get accomplished sitting there in a fetal position in tears. So let's just keep moving forward, right? And I've always kind of been a fan of Stoicism. And I started thinking about that memento mori, which for people that don't know what that means, it's just a very simple reminder that we're all going to die, essentially is what it means. I know that sounds really morbid, but it's actually an incredibly powerful mindset trick. And so I have not only that sign that you see behind me, a dear friend of mine gave me a golden coin that says it as well, and I have it on my nightstand. So I wake up every day and start my thought process with, this could be the last day. And in a really sort of interesting way, that alleviates tons and tons of stress for me. And I think for others that really embrace it, because if you think about like, this is all, this can end at any point. You just got to make the most of today. And then I just kind of look at what my to-do list is, and I just start working through it. And yeah, I love that stoic mindset. I have it obviously up in my office, as you see behind me. I talk to people about it. I'm really glad that you brought that up. I could kind of go on and on about it, but it's one of my favorite sayings.
Yeah, likewise, Conor. I'm glad that we're both in the Gold Coin Club with Memento Mori as a constant reminder. You're right. For me personally, I do feel that it's freeing. Once you get past the morbidity of it, you realize that it just ingrains. What I found is that for me, it ingrains the fact that everything truly is temporary. Life itself is temporary, which of course means that the hard times we encounter, those are going to be temporary, but equally the good times are also going to be temporary. So it really keeps us grounded. And for me personally, it also just encourages me, take those risks. As you said, Conor, it's the most morbid thing that might ever have been said on this podcast, is that today could be the last day. So why not just freaking go do the things that we want to do? So I so appreciate those insights, Conor. Personally, professionally, the things that you're doing, I think it's incredible. And that's why I don't know how you're going to top all of this advice for my final question that I love to ask guests. And that is your one best piece of advice. You've offered us so many good pieces of advice, but you know that we're being listened to by wantrepreneurs and entrepreneurs all across the world at all different stages of their own growth journeys. As a fellow entrepreneur, what's that one thing that you'd like to impart on them today?
You got to go after what you want, right? Don't sit around thinking about what other people think about you. Don't worry about what other people's view is of you. You're competing with you. I love, another saying that I love is comparison is the thief of joy, right? Run your own race, decide what it is you want from life, and just pursue it with reckless abandon. And you'd be amazed how often you can actually achieve those things. And don't wake up, at 85 years old, laying on your deathbed thinking, man, why did I allow myself to be miserable, stuck in something or some life or some job or career that I didn't want as long as I did. Once we're gone, we're gone. Unfortunately, the memory of all of us doesn't live on a whole lot longer than our physical self. So you might as well take advantage of this, because you only got one shot at it, right?
Yes, so well said. Important advice, whether we want to hear it or not, Conor. This is the stuff that we need. That's why I'm so appreciative of the work that you do. Honestly, you revealing your process here today in this conversation, it makes it sound fun. It's a fun exploratory thing where we look inward at the goals that we have, where we look outward at the opportunities available to us. So, Conor, the fact that you're guiding people through this, I think that you are so well suited for that work. And it's no surprise to me all the success stories that you showcase so happily and generously on your personal LinkedIn. So with that in mind, for listeners who do want to go deeper into all the great work that you're doing and connect with you further, drop those links on us. Where should listeners go from here?
Yeah, you can check me out. I don't know if anybody uses websites anymore. My wife always makes fun of me that I still use websites, but trinityadvisory3.com. That's the number 3, not spelled out. I'm on Instagram and Facebook, Trinity_advisory, and then Trinity Advisory on LinkedIn, although I don't really use the business one as much. I use my personal page on LinkedIn, which is just Conor Godfrey, and it's Conor, one N, which is kind of the uncommon spelling, although I will say that that's the first name spelling, is my understanding, if you're actually in Ireland. So,
Connor, I feel the same way. When people talk about the correct spelling of Brian, I'm like, it's always with an I. Don't give me this Y nonsense. So I feel you there. But listeners, you already know the drill. We're making it as easy as possible for you to find Connor and all the great work that he's doing. We're dropping all of those links down below in the show notes, no matter where it is that you're tuning into today's episode. You'll find his business website, trinityadvisory3.com. You can click right on through down below. We're also linking to his personal LinkedIn as well as all the other socials that he drops. So definitely check the show notes. You can click right on through. Otherwise, Connor, on behalf of myself and all the listeners worldwide, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
My pleasure, man. Thanks for having me, Brian. It's been great.